Welcome to the Rock Newman Show.
It's the Rock Newman Show.
Welcome back to the Rock Newman Show at Busboys and Poets on Saturday, June the 29th, 2013. We're wrapping up this hour with our guest, Spencer Overton. Spencer, your book here, let's refer to it again. Stealing Democracy, the New Politics of Voter Suppression.
Right.
The Supreme Court decision this week, just has everyone up in arms.
Right.
Can you talk to us about just sort of the fundamental basics?
Right.
Voting rights, the Voting Rights Act. Can you describe what that was, how it came about, why it came about, and what it's supposed to do?
Right. Well, there's just one part of the Voting Rights Act, in fact, the crown jewel, that was rolled back this past week. So you can still bring a lawsuit. The Voting Rights Act was enacted in 1965 after, you remember, the Edmund Pettus Bridge and Bloody Sunday there, where John Lewis and some other people were just really beat down by police. And after that, they were trying to register to vote and get people to register to vote and demonstrating about that. After that, Congress passed the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which made it easier to bring a lawsuit, but also created this preclearance process. And here's what the preclearance process is, Rock. Basically, any of these jurisdictions, it's all or part of 15 states, they have to, whenever they want to make an election change, they have to submit that change to the Department of Justice or to a federal court to ensure that that law is not unfair or discriminatory.
And those states were targeted
because of their record of discrimination, their history of literacy tests and other devices that made
poll tax.
Exactly. And this was so much better than litigation, because litigation can take years, lawsuits can take years, they can cost millions to bring, they miss a lot of under-the-radar manipulation. Here with preclearance, everything had to be submitted, everything would be reviewed, and so it was comprehensive, it was important. So the Supreme Court upheld this part of the Voting Rights Act when it was challenged, several times, right? And now this year, for the first time, the court rolled back this part of the Voting Rights Act. The court basically said that the coverage formula was outdated. So it didn't say you can't have this preclearance technique. It basically just said that it shouldn't apply to these states because now Mississippi is better and all this other kind of stuff. So they had problems with the coverage formula. My problem with the Supreme Court is that the text of the 15th Amendment explicitly gives Congress the power to make the determination about which states will be covered. Congress looked at this in 2006. They had 15,000-page record, 91 witnesses, 20 hearings. They determined this formula was right. I think the court was activist. We talk about judicial activism.
That's the term I'm getting ready to ask.
Exactly.
Absolutely. I mean, what your thought was, is this not the definition of judicial activism?
Yeah, it definitely is. Judges acting like legislators. And making determinations in terms of registration statistics and policy. All that stuff is stuff you need to do in Congress, right, with hearings, etc. But you know what? That's behind us. The question is, how do we move forward? The court still allowed room for Congress to update this coverage formula and to have preclearance in the future, so now the debate turns to Congress.
How can we as voters, how can we as citizens right now, okay, the decision is, the Supreme Court made its decision.
Right.
The next step is, what can we do to have the greatest impact to try to have the effect that Congress does the right thing?
Okay.
What do we do?
Number one, you got to call your member of Congress, Republican, Democrat, whomever.
Folks out there all through America that's watching Rock Newman Show at therocknewmanshow.com, please listen up. This is critically important.
Call your member of Congress. Say, this is a priority. We need to update the Voting Rights Act. They will take your call. Don't be intimidated. Don't be afraid. They're going to ask you a lot of deep policy questions.
When you say update the Voting Rights Act, specifically to do what?
Okay, we need to do really three big things.
Right.
One, we need to update preclearance. Preclearance is the part that was hurt, right,
Yes.
by this court's opinion.
Yes.
So when I say update preclearance, what I mean is any place that's had a recent voting rights violation, that place needs to be covered. Last 2-5 years, that kind of thing. Any place like that needs to be covered by preclearance. That's number one. Number two, moving forward, any place that violates the Voting Rights Act needs to be covered for a period of time. Let's say 10 years or whatever. Who knows what amount of time, but they need to have to submit all future changes to the government, all future changes to election laws. So number one is update preclearance. Number two is we need to update litigation and make it easier to bring a lawsuit. So for example, the county or state that's making the change should have to prove that this is fair in a court of law. They should have more of a burden. Right now, a voter doesn't have the resources to go in and hire all these experts and lawyers, etc. So put more of it on these jurisdictions. And there's some other things we need to do to streamline litigation. We need to go in and you need to be able to block these laws before they're on the books and harm voters, right, and get an injunction. So that's two, update litigation. Third thing we need to do is disclosure. Any change needs to be disclosed to the federal government, and it needs to, any change, a county or a state needs to explain why this is needed and what is the impact, the racial impact of this. We've got racial impact statements in various states for criminal justice laws. What's going to be the impact, racial impact of this new criminal justice law? Right. We need a similar law with regard to this.
To make something relevant, timely, in the event that this law that was struck down, the Supreme Court decision this week, had that been done in June of last year, 2012, is it a fair assessment that Mitt Romney might be president instead of Obama?
He could for a few reasons. One, you have places like Virginia and Florida that Obama won, but are that either covered in all or part by this part of the Voting Rights Act.
Right.
So that's number one, right? But number two, you look at places like North Carolina and Arizona that Obama didn't win, but they had to spend a lot of money. Republicans had to spend a lot of money. If it wasn't as close, they wouldn't have had to spend that money, and they'd be able to spend more money in places like Ohio and Pennsylvania and other places, right? Another example is Pennsylvania. You remember there was a big debate there over ID. Now, that wasn't covered by preclearance, right?
Right.
But if we didn't have preclearance, litigation resources, lawsuits, would have had to be not just in Pennsylvania, but in these other states, and there would have been a lot of lawsuit resources diverted from Pennsylvania, and possibly that kind of law could have got on the books.
And so the Justice Department wouldn't have as much of a hammer.
Right. The Justice Department wouldn't have had, and then also private parties, these civil rights organizations can bring lawsuits to stop them, right? Stop these discriminatory laws. But if there wasn't preclearance, right, in these southern areas and other areas, then those organizations would have had to expend their resources in places like Mississippi and Alabama, as well as places like Pennsylvania.
I'm going to go back to your book for a moment, because that title, it really jumps out at you, man. The red part with the white writing says, Stealing Democracy.
Right.
Why'd you choose that title?
Government of, by, and for the people is what it's about. And these politicians are stealing, they're taking democracy away from people, and we need to just call it out and be honest about it and lay it out.
Spencer Overton, I said today, Saturday, June 29, 2013, that I thought you could become president of the United States one day. Let's see what happens. Just, I give you the best wishes for your future. We'll stay in close touch, and I absolutely would love to have you back on the Rock Newman Show again.
Rock, I've enjoyed it. Thanks so much. I really look up to you. Appreciate it.
God bless you. We'll be back for the next hour with Dr. Julianne Malveaux. You don't want to miss this hour on the Rock Newman Show.